Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil Live. It is late at night. I'm sure everywhere that most of you are. But I had a few minutes this afternoon getting some work done. And I thought I've had so many emails and texts from folks wondering about Letecia Stauch and what my thoughts were in regard to this particular case. Have been doing some lives on Court TV and News Nation, and I thought I'd just take some time. And most importantly, it really takes a long time in a hotel to upload these huge video files to YouTube, sometimes hours to do that on hotel bandwidth. But the bandwidth's fast enough that if I just play the videos I've created as part of a live, then it's immediately uploaded and posted. And so you all can just go to sleep and watch this in the morning, or please stay with me for a bit and we'll get rolling and talking about some things. And to Dyson's Crazy Adventures, great to see you here. Sally Langenforth, it's good to see you here. Saying, hey, I'm glad you're doing something on this case. Lane Johnson, hey, Run the World, good to see you. Yeah, it's I'm on West Coast. Run the World's in San Diego. I'm north up in Los Angeles this week, and so the what normally would be a little later for me, and especially for those of you on the East Coast, it's just perfect timing to get some things done. So. Yeah, and Dyson Crazy Adventure, you're right. Utah is just getting pounded with snow, and I've left family to shovel walks while I'm sitting here wearing a light sweater. So anyway, Tiffany Guzman, great to see you. Jennifer M., great to see you. Ava Hawkshaw, hi, Diane Phoenix. Good to see you all here. And again, I have no idea how many people might show up this late in the day or in the night. A lot of you, it's somewhere between 10 o'clock at night and midnight. West Coasters, it's 9 p.m., and of course, to our friends in Oz, you're just waking up and getting going. So you got the whole day ahead of you. But we're going to jump right into this because I had some real emotion today as I was watching Stout or Stock. And I want to get some of your opinions and read those as we're going through and watching. I'm really kind of dedicating this to Gannon. Really frustrated, and I finally came to know Gannon today in the trial. At the end of this video, I'm going to have the opening statements from the defense and the prosecution for those of you who want to hang on. So we're going to probably go about 35 minutes or so with some comment that I have and some things that happened today. And then for those who would really like an encapsulated review and listen to the opening statement of the defense and prosecution, then it's great. Yeah, and Kez Chick 56 says it's 2 p.m. in Australia. So yeah, it's and I'm kind of twisted around trying to keep my bearings. I've been traveling so much lately that I'm kind of forgetting what city I'm in from time to time. But nonetheless, I want to get going on this. I want to watch for your comments as we are rolling along, and let's talk about the Gannon Stock case. But I want to also make sure that you're listening to this, because this was really compelling to me, the Zach Latham case, and I hope you've been watching my video on that from yesterday or the day before, where I was on Court TV talking about that particular case, which is a really intriguing case because this kid doesn't seem to be like the example of a great citizen, and yet I think he's going to get off. And frankly, I think he was the victim in that crime. And some of you, that may really frustrate because he ended up stabbing and killing a 51-year-old correctional officer. And you know how I feel about law enforcement. I usually am 100% behind them. But from what I'm seeing, it kind of looks like this kid was pushed into a corner. May have laid all the groundwork to be pushed into a corner, but the answer isn't to take the law into your own hands, folks. When things are going bad, you just got to work with the system, even as frustrating as it is. But let's jump in and talk about what happened today in this particular case. So we'll jump back in and out from time to time.
What is people together number one?
That's my boy.
Gannon? Yes, yes,
Yes. Yeah, so as I said, he was born on September 29th, and it was about a month after that. I think it was October 20th. I got to hold him for the first time, and that's how big he was right there. And the last time I ever got to hold him, he was in a box about that big as well. 6 months after he died.
When Colorado stepmom Letecia Stauch reported her 11-year-old stepson Gannon missing back on January of 2020, investigators immediately wondered if foul play was involved. Her stories changed almost every time she spoke with law enforcement, but it wasn't until they served search warrants that the red flags really started waving. Well, thanks for joining us here at Profiling Evil, and make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button and ringing the bell so that you get all of our notifications on videos just like this one. Now, I think most of you know the case of Gannon Stauch, his murder. It happened while his natural father was away on military service, and the more we learn about the horrifying story, the madder I get. Now, since you probably already know what happened in the case, including the facts describing how his body was transported from Colorado to Florida before being disposed of, I thought I'd retrace the timeline in this case a little bit. I joined Julia Janae this morning on Court TV just before the case launched into its first witness. Now, the prosecution did a masterful job of putting on Gannon Stauch's father, Al. He took the stand, and his job was to persuade the jury to understand more fully who this amazing young boy was. Now, two things really stood out to me that I hope you'll take some time to watch the testimony and see how you felt. When they put up the image for the jury to see what Gannon looked like, was "That's my son." Now, his voice was quivering, and it reminded me of other grieving people that I've talked to throughout the course of my life who have experienced such gut-wrenching pain as he went through. Frankly, it was difficult to listen to, and Al Stauch told the jury about Gannon's premature birth. Now, this kid was born months earlier than he should have been, and it took nearly a month before he was ever allowed to hold his baby boy for the first time. Now, the cameras in the courtroom made it impossible to see what was going on his face, or even seeing the witnesses as they testify. But I could envision in my mind's eye everything that he was talking about. I mean, I literally could see him holding that little tiny baby in his hands. And then as he remarked about the last time he held his son, that he was the same size. Speaking of the decomposed remains that were left and bundled into the little package that he received once law enforcement recovered Gannon's bodies. It was eerily the same size in his comments on the witness stand, and I can't imagine that the jury wasn't compelled to a great deal by that statement alone. Now, I hope that the jury felt the same sadness, perhaps even outrage, that I felt. And the other thing that deeply impacted me this morning as I watched Mr. Stout testify was the way in which he referred to the defendant in the case, his former wife, Letecia Stauch. He would not call her by her name, only referring to her as the defendant. And I wondered if the prosecution had coached him to some degree to stay away from humanizing her or if he's just so sickened by even seeing her or saying her name that he can't even take and make himself do that. Either way, in my opinion, it was a good strategy to call her the defendant, not her name, because the defense is clearly going to do everything they can to humanize her and classify her as a victim herself in her own right, a victim of her upbringing, a victim of the horrible circumstances she endured as a child in a dysfunctional family, and now a victim of the criminal justice system, which is demanding payment for the crime of murder. Now, I'll tell you what, I was really frustrated by this because I have seen and known and know today a lot of people who were formerly victimized by someone, and yet they chose to take these incredibly productive pathways in their life. Didn't change the fact that they weren't really emotionally impacted and carry baggage because of what happened. But they didn't go out and murder people. I joined Julie Janae on Court TV this morning before the testimony started, and she asked me how a case like this is viewed by criminal investigators. Let's take a minute and listen to that exchange.
Thanks to Scott for that report. Here to discuss it on our show, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King out of Dallas, Texas. Mike, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Morning, Julia.
This is one of those defendants that has you scratching your head. Talk to me about profiling evil. This is a woman who has admitted to doing this horrendous thing to her stepson, stabbing him 18 plus times and shooting him. Where do you even start when you're on the investigative side of this, trying to profile or be a criminologist about this?
We often try to get right to the whodunits in these kinds of cases, and oftentimes what we do is we take kind of a short-sighted look. We need to look at the victimology, or why did this child become the victim? And there are lots of discussions out there right now about what her mindset might have been or what it wasn't at the time, whether she was killing demons. She killed this little boy. If, in fact, she's found guilty of that, that's going to be the real challenge. So the thing that always concerns me in these kinds of cases is, number one, the victimology. Why was this child chosen and the victim? Was it because she hit a breaking point, that she's taking care of the kids on her own, their stepkids? She doesn't have the support of her husband, who happens to be away at the moment? Or were there long-stemming events that were going on, other events of abuse where somebody should have stepped up and said something or stopped or mitigated or got her some help? And then we have to think about her psychology at the time that she commits this crime. And if, in fact, she is killing demons, that's a whole lot different than somebody who disposes of a body, tries to evade responsibility for it, feigns that something else happens, comes up with a bunch of stories. It's clear that whether she's mentally ill or not, which I have no idea, what's clear to me, Julia, is that she understands what society's standards are, that you don't kill people, and yet she tried to get away with it anyway.
You know, and the one thing that seemed to be on everybody's mind is whether Letecia Stauch knew that she had committed homicide, that she was going to commit homicide, and whether she's even competent to stand trial. Now, so let's just stop there for a minute and get some comments as they're coming in, because my point, and I hope it came across clearly in this, is I don't know if this person's crazy. You would have to be crazy to commit a crime like this. No question that she has issues in her life. No question she had issues at that moment. But when I look at these criminal cases, what I really try to do is look at the mindset. Lori Daybell is a perfect example. If Lori Daybell truly believes she was ridding the world of zombies, and she is yet to be found guilty or yet to be acquitted, but if she believed that, she would have been on the rooftops shouting that she'd killed zombies rather than not talking about where her children were and going to Hawaii and marrying somebody whose wife died 2 weeks earlier and on and on and on. And so when we look at the Letecia Stauch case, I want you to kind of think about this from a criminal investigation standpoint. Get rid of all the emotion and look at the elements of the crime and the behaviors of the individual who's the person of interest or focus in this case. And what she did was she spent days and days and weeks until she was formally charged, denying this, coming up with different stories. She, if and all of this is true, and she said it is, she just says she was mentally incompetent and insane, that she also did things to avoid being captured and to hide his body. I mean, traveling across country is a huge effort, and somebody who's crazy wouldn't be going through that. Someone who has some real sense about them, about what am I going to do? I've violated societal standards, and yet she continued to try to get away with it. That's really the crux of it, in my opinion. And I love the fact that you're chatting back and forth to each other in here. Thank you so much for your support. I hope you're hitting the like button. We don't have a lot of people on tonight, but holy cow, it's midnight on the East Coast and almost 10 o'clock on the West Coast. So if I'm using the new math, that would mean it's even after midnight on the East Coast. So let's jump back in. The court has determined that she's competent to stand trial and assist in her own defense and to understand what's going on. But the question's going to be, is she truly guilty of murder, or is she not guilty by reason of insanity?
That could be an important part of the standard in this case, and looking at not necessarily does she have challenges, does she have deficiencies, but did she know right from wrong at the moment that she did all of this? But we did hear a lot more about her from her defense attorney during those opening statements when he talked about her past, talked about all of the abuse that she endured, that she was molested from a very young age. Her mother had stepfathers. Her mother was absent and left her with men who then did terrible things to her, and that she developed these multiple personalities to cope with that. When you're profiling, how do you even prove that if you're on the defense side, and how do you combat it when you're on the prosecution side and using detective work to bring that evidence to the jury?
As an investigator, I always tried to concentrate not on all these possibilities, but what's most probable, and the fact that as an investigator, the responsibility is to look at the elements of crimes and whether those elements were met, and then hopefully allow professionals who understand the mind much better to map out what was going on. But you know, this always comes up, this question of whether it's nurture or nature, and does this person become bad because they had a dysfunctional family and a dysfunctional childhood? Well, holy cow, there are a lot of people that had dysfunctional childhoods that understood what the parameters were and they held the line. And so you can get into all kinds of crazy discussions about this. And for me, Julia, it's always go back to the elements of the crime. Did in fact this occur? And then let the experts determine whether she had the mental capacity to make those decisions. But I always go back to the fact she knew what the standards were, it was evident, and she tried to cover it up.
And that cover-up can certainly be used as consciousness of guilt by the prosecution in this case. Mike, stand by. I understand that we have some movement inside of the courtroom. Not sure if we've got a live picture yet, but the jury is coming in. The jury is seated there in Colorado. So if we can, let's go in live.
And that's what this is all going to boil down to, in my opinion, as to whether Letecia Stauch knew that what she was doing when she stabbed 11-year-old Gannon 18 times, then crushed his skull and shot him in the head before driving him cross-country, where she would later stuff his remains inside of a suitcase and throw his remains off of a bridge in the Florida Panhandle. Now let's take a quick look at the facts of this case. They're going to undoubtedly come out during the course of this trial, but I want to just kind of review them quickly. You see, on January 27th, 2020, Sometime before she placed a 911 call reporting Gannon as a runaway child from the residence, Letecia Stauch clearly murdered the boy. She's not contesting that. The details are going to come out in the trial, and you'll get the majority of the case laid out by the prosecution at the end of this video. And I hope you'll stick around and listen to the prosecution's opening statements. And then I have the defense opening statements at the end of the video. So get through all of this, and then if you want to hang in there, you can catch all of that. It's really going to be a place where you can get the entirety of the case in a short amount of time. But here's the deal. Stauch told emergency responders that she hadn't seen Gannon since about 3 o'clock that afternoon. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office launched searches, and they entered Gannon into the state and national databases as an active runaway. For 3 days, detectives were conducting interviews and collecting surveillance and following up on their leads. And then on January 30th, 2020, the case was upgraded from a runaway to an endangered missing child. And at that point, they were able to call in federal resources and get those deployed. Letecia Stauch made her first news interview on the following day. And while police were working with Stauch's husband behind the scenes, you see, he didn't believe from the moment he got home from military service that she was telling the truth about what was going on, including her allegations that she was sexually assaulted in the home, that there was a kidnapping, and so many other storylines that almost changed daily, that he started working with undercover law enforcement to make sure that they could get as much information from her as possible. Then, at that time, a neighbor came forward with home surveillance video that showed 2 people believed to be Letecia Stauch and Gannon climbing into the Stauch truck and leaving the residence on the day that Gannon went missing. Now, the video only showed the defendant, Stauch, returning to the residence later that day, creating more holes in her story. Well, hey folks, I'm pausing to share some concerns I have surrounding identity theft and fraud. I've learned a lot from our partner, Aura. They're the pros at protecting people from cyber predators. Aura provides identity theft protection, credit and fraud protection, and online and device security for you and your family. They taught me to think twice before answering those online questionnaires designed to steal our personal information. You know, it must be working because U.S. statistics show that 33% of us have been victimized by identity theft at an annual cost of more than $56 billion each year. Aura protection plans come with around-the-clock support, a money-back guarantee, and a $1 million theft policy. But here's the best part. You can try Aura for free by clicking on this special Profiling Evil link in the description down below. When you do, we get a small commission. But think about it. You insure your car and you insure your house. Don't you think it's time to insure your identity? Now let's get back to today's discussion. Well, the investigation intensified on March 2nd, and Letecia Stauch was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I mean, look at the amount of ground that she's covering here. She arrived in Colorado Springs on March 5th and was arraigned on March 11th. But 9 days later, on March 20th, authorities announced that they had discovered Gannon's remains in Pace, Florida, leading to new charges being filed against Letecia. And so I want to just kind of recap this so you can kind of get this. Looking at the world from a satellite view, let's zoom into Colorado Springs and the location where Gannon disappeared, where the homicide occurred. Then where we find Letecia Stauch over in South Carolina, and finally where Gannon's body's recovered down in Florida. She was covering a lot of ground, and you're going to hear testimony about the vehicles that were being used and how she tried to justify the movement of vehicles back and forth. But all of this led to the new murder charges that she faces today. And by June of 2020, Letecia starts going through a series of mental health evaluations, and it's during this time that she even attempts to escape from jail, concocting this goofy plan to break the glass out in her jail cell and squeeze through the window and slip away into the night. I mean, don't you think, or maybe more importantly, shouldn't she have thought that corrections officials, these people that are charged with keeping inmates inside of the jails and prisons, had already thought about that window and doorway being a possible escape methodology? Anyway, nonetheless, the attempt failed, and before long, Stauch completed her mental health evaluation, and it's about that time she decides she's going to defend herself, something that the judge is compelled to let her do. So that happens around March 5th of 2021, a year later from the murders. Now, by May 3rd, she realized that she had a fool for a lawyer, and she was assigned a public defender to move the case along. By February 11th of 2022, 2 years after the murder, Letecia Stauch changed her plea from not guilty to not guilty by reason of insanity. And you can look that up in the Colorado statutes, and it will just drive you bonkers as you read through it. So maybe take a moment and go do that. But on October 13th, 2022, a trial date was set for March of this year, just last month, when jury selection began. And now we're off and running as the state versus Letecia Stauch. So let's listen to the judge's instructions to the jury after the prosecution and the defense entered their opening statements before today's testimony started.
As I said this morning, opening statements are not.
Hey, you can see I put my glasses on so I can actually read the comments a little more clearly and not make a fool of myself. And I thought before we do those judges' comments, we just look and see what you're all talking about, and if you have any specific questions for me. Looks like a lot of you listened to parts and pieces today of the trial, and I'll tell you, that's one of the cool things about YouTube, in my opinion, is to be able to dive in and get past all the yammering to the parts you like. So probably a few of you are actually doing that on my stuff too, which is fine if it helps you get the information you need and be able to do it quickly. So if you've got any specific questions, let's talk about them right now. Plug them in here, and if not, we'll continue to move on. This is interesting. Candy says, I think the burns were new. Not sure physically if he was not sure she physically abused him on a regular basis prior to this incident. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see if there's some behaviors that suggest that this had been going on before. I don't know. That's a tough one. So the question, what do you think was a motive? Yeah, I mean, heck, I don't know. Some people just, the stress becomes so bad, and an ungovernable kid, which all kids are ungovernable at times, and at least hopefully they're ungovernable. We want them to kind of always try to see what the limit is and kind of learn what the boundaries are as they grow. I was never troubled too much by my kids trying to figure out what the boundary was, but they certainly knew what the boundary was, and it was very clear. And so they always respected it. But, pretty hard in these mixed families. And folks, I don't say that in a judging way, because I had a mother who went through 4 husbands in my lifetime and saw a lot of change personally. Hey, Snug with the Pug, thanks a lot. But, folks, you don't know how much these donations help, so I really appreciate that, and that's really kind that you would do that. And I hope you're considering our channel memberships and stuff like that, folks, because it really does help us pay the bills and try to do things. We're actually trying to pay for a burial in Palm Springs right now on an individual who is indigent, and We're going to do a little story on that later, but I can't get permission from the cemetery to do it, and nobody knows any family members. So the individual's not going to get a lot of good treatment, I think. But nonetheless, let's see. So here it is. Tracy talks a lot. I really appreciate the time you put into these. Why not send Gannon to his mom or let his dad know she was having trouble coping? Yeah, I mean, that's the in a functional family, that's really what it takes. At times people need help. And so it either wasn't appropriate to ask for help, or I don't know. Boy, these are tough. I just wish I had answers like that to really help out. This is interesting from Gloria. My last daughter, or my last child, a daughter, is 15, and she said she was due on my 42nd birthday. Oh yeah, so you had a late baby. Let's see. She was due on my 42nd birthday, born autistic. And oh my goodness, Gloria, what, how lucky that little girl is to have you and to care for her. And yeah, you'll spend a lifetime, won't you, worrying about that one. And thanks for sharing that. That's just amazing. Maybe Gannon was suffering more than any of us know. Nanny Mo, thank you so much. That is really kind of you. And again, that just really is nice when that happens. So thank you, and appreciate all of your support on that. Alicia Nelson says, I think Letecia went too far with abusing Gannon on the night of the 26th and knew that Al, the husband, would find out when he returned home, so she had to get rid of the evidence. I think that's a pretty astute observation. Could certainly be one of the possibilities there. The interesting thing is something that people aren't really talking about that I kind of picked up on is if he was injured that badly in the home, and they now have videos showing him being helped out, and he looks like he's walking under his own power, climbing into the truck before he disappears, and then she returns in the truck without him. If he was stabbed 18 times at the home, and there certainly is blood and evidence in the home, it seems to me like he couldn't walk out. So I'm wondering if the injuries were less traumatic at home, enough to create blood and a huge amount of blood, and that maybe en route to the hospital or something that he may have expired, or she may have just been so angry that she found a different place and finished the homicide, which we have been told by court testimony that included 18 stab wounds and crushing his head and then shooting him in the head, which, we just don't know the mindset. But boy, that's a terribly tough thing to talk about, isn't it? But that's bothered me, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that, folks, because he does motor out to the truck under his own power. And so I'm wondering if there was an attempt to maybe start toward a hospital, and then you might be right. She thought, how am I going to ever explain this? And so came up with this idea of let's get rid of the evidence. So I don't know. Anyway, let's see. And summer, let it be summer, which I wish it would become summer, at least springtime. I'd like to see springtime. When I was listening to the recording between her stepson and herself, she was acting in a very evil way. So yeah, it's kind of hard to describe what an evil way is. I'd be interested in a little more information, but she was nasty and he was crying. It was, yeah, and I agree with you. It was really sad. So let's see. Fofa Cat says, caught us live, been a while. Looking forward to insights. Hopefully I'm providing a little insight, at least my opinion, and I'm really enjoying reading some of your opinions or not. I'm reading your opinions. I'm just reading this one here that I thought Nicole put up was interesting. He wasn't stabbed yet or not bad on that morning. I always thought she probably kicked him in the stomach and perforated his spleen. That's interesting. I don't know how you came up with that, Nicole, but that's an interesting comment. We've got to somehow explain all the blood in the bedroom, enough to soak through the carpet and into the wood and into the bedding. So that's going to be interesting too, to figure out that. Anyway, Sally Langendorf, I'm sorry. Thanks for that super chat. Really kind of you. And again, folks, I really appreciate that because it helps us do things. I want you to know, other than I bought a microphone when my microphone broke, but we try to do good with the stuff that you provide. So thanks a lot. We've got some exciting news coming down the pike in regard to a new podcast that's going to be launched that I think once we get the contract signed, we'll talk a little more about. It'll be a short version podcast, about 9 or 10 episodes, but it'll have some major backing behind it, which will be kind of fun. So really appreciate all your support. And by the way, the proceeds from that we're using to go toward building this new Children's Justice Center as well. So the proceeds from the book we've been dedicating toward building the center. The center is slated to break ground in about August. We're waiting to see construction. But anyway, we're just thrilled that we're able to give this back and try to help out a little bit. Jay, thank you. A stop comm isn't the worst, but my parents were divorced when I was 6, and the court gave me to my dad, and he welcomed me. Men are not always the ones to look out for. There are some great moms and dads out there, and it's a tough world. And I would hate to be a kid today, wouldn't you? I don't know that I would have the wisdom to be safe on the internet and safe in relationships and everything else. I guess we're all born at the time that we were meant to be born. So Run the World, thank you so much for this donation. Wow, what a compliment. You're fantastic. I don't know about that, but no, I'm not having a great time in California. I'm having to work my guts out. It's almost 10 o'clock at night, and I'm just barely getting enough time to get on and say hi to everybody here. So, but I had meetings with a bunch of law enforcement folks, and that's I'm grateful that I still have a like what I call my day job, and the day job gives me the ability to actually go all over the world and meet with law enforcement and do some pretty remarkable things. So I'm really grateful for that. I don't know if you've been catching me. I've been doing a lot of court TV and a little bit of News Nation, and the court TV stuff, I just really like the way in which they do stuff. And with Lori Vallow Daybell, some of you are asking about that. I'll be doing a lot during the Daybell trial on court TV, just because I spent most of my career doing ritual crime, and this certainly fits the ritual crime in the Daybell case. But we're talking about tonight the Stout case. So a girl named Tom, thank you so much. Love your channel. Well, thank you. We love all of you, and I'm glad you're learning, because that was kind of the whole reason why I wanted to do this. So thank you for saying that, and it's validating, and I hope what we are doing really does help. We want to kind of edutain and get people to think a little more balanced. And sometimes we get our emotions so wrapped into things that we jump on. I don't know if you caught my video yesterday where I was talking about Zachary Latham, but while I was here in Los Angeles, I went and met with Annie Elise from 10 to Life, and we did a podcast for her new podcast. and we did it live, or we did it together so that we could kind of have some fun. And then I tried to do some promos for her, and she sent me all the bloopers, and so I put a couple of the bloopers in last night just to show you what a goofus I am at times and how grateful I am for editing. But thank you, girl named Tom. That's very nice. Gloria, my intestines don't work. Holy cow, you've been challenged with a lot, and thank you so much for helping out. It feels like children don't have any rights, but that's the real key here, is they have a lot of rights, and people need to step up. And it always troubles me in these cases when you have neighbors who jump on the bandwagon after the fact and say, I always felt something was wrong there. Well, I wonder if those people that felt something was wrong ever called the Division of Family Services and said, hey, I feel like there's something wrong. Or they just thought, I don't want to get involved. And then all of a sudden, a child is brutalized. So if you're seeing anything that really makes you nervous, folks, call and let the professionals kind of sort it out and make a visit and try to check things out. Jenny, is that Jenny in Georgia? Anyway, love bloopers. Absolutely. Well, that's my thing. Yeah. And the Glare said, yeah, I saw the bloopers. Anyway, yeah, this thing is crazy. So let's get back in and let's hear what the judge instruction was, and then go into the actual closing or opening arguments. And Jane, thanks again so much. I know I shouldn't say that. I actually say it even in important meetings that I'm working my guts out, but thank you. It's an honor to be able to do it. And it's frankly a lot of fun. And, all this started during COVID. If those of you who have been with us from the start, my kids who were tired of hearing me talk about old war stories said, hey, you ought to get on YouTube and just yap on there for a minute. And for some reason, it's resonated with a few of you folks. So thank you so much. And again, we don't want to do anything other than what is appropriate. And you'll always find that I just don't jump to conclusions. I always try to stick with what's publicly available. And I always try to give law enforcement the benefit of the doubt, because I really do believe in the process. But nonetheless, and Dog Defender, thank you. There's 566 people on, but only 183 likes. Why? Run, don't walk. So please make sure you're hitting that like button. It does help us a lot. And to Alicia, thank you. You are a survivor of abuse. And today I actually spoke to one of the children that I and I'm not patting myself on the back, but that I rescued 33 years ago in that cult, who happened to call asking for a letter of reference for something that she's doing. And what an honor it was. I love those kids and just hope for them always. In fact, I heard from another one just 2 days earlier. So every once in a while, I get some pretty lovely notes from people that I was able to try to represent a little bit in the criminal justice system at a bad time in their life. But anyways, let's jump back into this. Jane, thanks for joining up, and let's hear what the judge's instruction was to everybody.
Their purpose is only to help you understand what the evidence will be. Keep in mind that in this case, as in every case, attorneys are paid advocates. Their job is to persuade you that evidence proves or does not prove a particular point. And as I said earlier, nothing an attorney says is evidence, and they do not take an oath to tell you the truth. Next, the prosecution will offer evidence. Evidence consists of the sworn testimony of the witnesses, the exhibits received in evidence, and stipulated, admitted, or judicially noticed facts.
Now, I wanted to stop there because I don't know how many of you caught that. The attorneys in these cases are paid to get across a point The prosecution is paid to get across a point and protect the rights of people and the government and the laws that are in place. The defense is paid to get that person the best possible deal they can, the best result possible. But did you hear the judge say they're not paid to tell the truth? They're paid. And so that really kind of bugs you, doesn't it? It's always bugged me. But that's why we have juries, and that's why we have judges to make sure the rule of law is followed. And that's why you can't just sit back and just to say, well, the prosecution charged him, so they must be guilty. Nor can you sit back and say, they said I didn't do it, so they must not have done it. You need to be able to weigh all that evidence yourselves.
After the prosecution's evidence, the defendant may present evidence in her own behalf, but she is not required to do so. I want to remind you that the defendant is presumed to be innocent. The prosecution must prove the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove her innocence or call any witnesses or introduce any evidence. At the conclusion of the evidence, I will tell you the rules of law which you are to use in reaching your verdict. I will read those rules of law to you, and you will be allowed to take them with you to the jury room during your deliberations. After you have heard all of the evidence and the instructions, the prosecution and the defense may make their closing arguments. Like opening statements, closing arguments are not evidence. The prosecuting attorney will have the opportunity to reply to the closing argument made by the defense. You will then go to the jury room to deliberate on a verdict. Your purpose as jurors is to decide what the facts are, and your decision must be based solely upon the evidence. It is my job to decide what rules of law apply to the case. You must follow all of the rules as I explain them to you. You may not follow some and ignore others. Even if you disagree with or do not understand the reasons for some of the rules, you must follow them.
Well, there you go, folks. I hope you'll join me on Court TV as we talk more about the Stauch murder case. And if you're interested, make sure you remember that at the end of the video is the prosecution and the defense opening statements, and they'll be playing throughout the end of it. And it's really the best place to get the entire case encapsulated down in a real quick to understand way to do that. Well, you know what? From Southern California, I'm just going to say thanks so much for supporting Profiling Evil, and please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button. Make sure that you're checking out Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. And please share us with your friends. And if you like podcasts, folks, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil Podcasts. You can find it on your favorite podcast platform. And go over to profilingevil.com and check us out on the web. That's where you can order my books and you can learn a whole lot more about Profiling Evil. And please consider joining our channel memberships. It's a great way for you to get a whole lot more information for just a little more, and your financial support really does make a difference in helping us out. So please consider donating to Profiling Evil. So from sunny Southern California, as I head back to the snows of Utah, thanks again, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.
Paramount question you will have to answer as jurors in this case has to do with sanity, specifically the defendant's sanity. At the conclusion of the evidence, the court will give you jury instructions. One specific jury instruction will talk specifically about insanity. It will read that as to the question of sanity, the defendant was insane at the time of the commission of the acts if she was so diseased or defective in mind at the time of the commission of the acts as to be incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to that act, or she suffered from a condition of mind caused by a mental disease or defect that prevented her from forming a culpable mental state. That is an essential element of a crime charge. A culpable mental state is like an intentionally or knowingly. Evidence in this case will show that she could distinguish between right and wrong, and that she was absolutely capable of forming the specific intent required for these charges. Those instructions will go on to give specific guidance on what qualifies as a mental disease or defect. It says care should not be taken to confuse mental disease or defect with moral obliquity, mental depravity, passion growing out of anger, revenge, or hatred, or other motives and kindred evil conditions. Because when an act is induced by any of these causes, the ones that I just listed, the person is accountable to the law, meaning that person can be found guilty for committing crimes charged. You should consider the evidence you will hear in this case in context with that instruction. This case is about two people. First is Gannon Jacob Stout, an 11-year-old little boy, came into this world premature, weighing just 1 pound 6 ounces. He proved to be a fighter, overcame the difficulties associated with being born so small. He's survived by his mother, Landon Hyatt, his father, Al Stauch, and his precocious little sister, Latham. On January 26, 2020, something bad happened inside the Stout family home. Gannon suffered some burns. You'll learn this from a video recording this defendant made that night, January 26th. You'll hear her as she manipulated Gannon, putting guilt on him for some mistake that a child made. And in that recording, you'll hear Gannon say in his own words, "I'm just worried about my burns."
Two, I just don't know what to do.
Well, devastating. Initially, Scott, I can't lie, when the TMZ information.
Gannon, I promise it's the last time I'm gonna ask you. I'm just freaked out, okay? Are you sure you didn't do it on purpose? Okay, we promise. You promise. Pinky promise. Okay, all right, so listen. We're gonna have to sell stuff to fix it, okay? So we figure out what we gotta sell. We can sell the sofa. We can sell whatever, because we gotta get it fixed. So lady, don't be mad at us and kick us out of the house. Okay? You got it? You got it?
I'm just worried about my
Okay, shh, listen. So tomorrow,
The other person in this case is that last voice you just heard, who said so tomorrow. This lady sitting right here, the defendant. January 26, 2020 and into January 27, 2020, she was the sole provider for Gannon. Her husband, Al Stauch, Gannon's father, serves in the National Guard. He was in Oklahoma for National Guard training, left that Saturday night, the 25th. Everything that happened to Gannon from that point forward was her decision. She carried out actions to kill Gannon, to put his body in a suitcase and hide it, to hide evidence of what she did to Gannon. Told numerous stories to investigators to manipulate the course of the investigation. And finally, to discard Gannon inside that suitcase off of a Florida bridge like garbage. January 27, 2020, Gannon's home, located at 6627 Mandan Drive, here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, turned into the stuff of nightmares. In fact, the one place a little boy like Gannon should have felt the safest, his bedroom, turned into, like I said, the stuff of nightmares. That bedroom is in fact where he was brutally murdered. The defendant attacked him viciously, mercilessly, deliberately, and intentionally. These are exhibits that you'll see from the doctor down in Florida, Dr. Ignacio, when she performed the autopsy. He'll tell you that Gannon suffered 18 stab wounds to his body, his chest, his back, his head, and most importantly, his arms and his hands. Why is that important? Gannon was fighting for his life, and those were defensive wounds. Next came a crushing blow to his head that was so strong, it fractured his skull like an eggshell. That wasn't enough for this defendant. He retrieved a 9mm handgun, fired it at Gannon 3 times. 2 bullets struck the pillow near him and were caught in the fibers of that pillow. That 3rd bullet entered his jaw, traveled through his head, fracturing his mandible, his vertebrae, hitting his spinal cord, and lodged in the back of his head and was recovered at autopsy. Gannon's life drained from his body, drop by drop. The photo that's on the screen right now is a picture of his bedroom. Same corner where he was in that picture, or where you'll see him in the picture in the bed. Each one of those markers signifies a small blood drop that splattered across his wall. It ran down the corner of his mattress, soaked through the carpet padding, and puddled on the concrete foundation below that carpet. The defendant then took very deliberate action. She decided to hide her crimes from the world, and she took action to hide those crimes from the world. She collected Gannon's bloody and broken body and the blankets and pillow that were near him and shoved them into a suitcase and hid them in the storage unit in that basement. That basement storage unit is right around the corner from Gannon's bedroom. What she didn't know is that she was leaving clues behind in that storage room. That plastic tub that you see in the bottom left portion of that picture has Gannon's blood on it. There was an Amazon box in that storage room that has Gannon's blood on it. The concrete floor in that storage room had Gannon's blood on it. The defendant next decided to clean Gannon's room. Deliberately, intentionally, knowing what she was doing. She scrubbed the walls, cleaning them off. She scrubbed the carpet with scrub brushes that were later found in the dishwasher. Those scrub brushes have carpet fibers in them. They have blood on them. They have Gannon's DNA on them. This is Gannon's bedroom when members of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office first came to the house on January 27th in the evening hours. This is what it looked like. No obvious signs of a struggle. No obvious signs of blood as they walked through the house and through Gannon's bedroom. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or a murder because the defendant had cleaned them up. And also realized she had Gannon's blood on her person. Clothes that she was wearing, likely containing Gannon's blood, based off of how much blood had hit the walls, were never found. Her clothing was never found. These shoes, the defendant's shoes, were found on the washing machine, drying. That reddish rust color that you can see on the soles, Gannon's blood and DNA were found on those shoes. You can see just how much blood she was walking through as she was cleaning up that mess. Took more deliberate action. She collected and discarded other important clues. I mentioned she stabbed Gannon 18 times. The instrument that she used to stab Gannon has never been found. That 9mm handgun that she used to fire 3 rounds at Gannon, shell casing ejected out of that firearm each time she pulled the trigger. No shell casing was ever found in Gannon's room. She then took more deliberate action when she hid Gannon in a suitcase, first in her car, and then up north near the El Paso County, Douglas County line. GPS location data was used to track her locations or her movements. And it led to another grisly discovery up just in this area here. A board was found under a tree. That board had Gannon's blood on it. This is miles away from the Stout family home, which is in the southeast part of the city, close to the airport. You'll learn through testimony that this board came from the Stout family garage. Then took more deliberate and thoughtful action. She loaded the suitcase containing Gannon into the back of a rented van and drove to Florida. And that's the course of her travels from here to Florida. She rented a hotel room in Pensacola, Florida on February 4th, 2020. She drove a short distance from that hotel room, which is sort of by those blue angular marks on the map, up to where that red square is on the map. Drove a short distance from that hotel room, across a dark bridge that drives over a river that flows into the Gulf of Mexico. There she acted with determined purpose. Stopped that van. She hauled the suitcase out of the back of that van, drug it to the side of the road, hoisted it up over the railing, pushed it over the side, hoping that Gannon would never be found. 48 days later, 1,300 miles away from where Gannon was murdered, the search for answers and Gannon's remains finally ended on March 17, 2020, when the suitcase that came from that basement storage room, Gannon's remains, blankets, and the pillow were found by an unlucky bridge worker checking that bridge for safety. And imagine the shock that he felt when he realized what was inside that suitcase. Inside that suitcase, obviously Gannon's decomposing remains. Also, these two blankets and that pillow. Remember the pictures that I showed just a moment ago of Gannon in bed? These pictures were taken by this defendant on the morning of January 27, 2020. Sent them by text message to Gannon's father, Al, who was in Oklahoma for training. Take note of those blankets. Take note of the blankets that were recovered from that suitcase. The very same blankets and pillow that were in those pictures on January 27, 2020 were found 1,300 miles away with Gannon underneath that bridge. The defendant then purposely, intentionally came up with numerous different stories about what had happened. Gannon was missing, went to a friend's house and never returned. Gannon was kidnapped and she was raped by a guy named Eduardo. Gannon was kidnapped and she was raped, but this time by a guy named Quincy Brown. She went to look for a bike up near that Douglas County, El Paso County line. Gannon test rode that bike, crashed, and suffered a horrible head injury. And a guy named Quincy Brown takes Gannon, and now the defendant doesn't know where Gannon is. Cartels were somehow involved with Gannon's disappearance. And most cruelly, that Landon Hyatt, Gannon's mother, was involved with Gannon's disappearance. All of her actions were purposely designed by her to distance herself from what she did. Throw off investigators, buy her time, escape accountability for what she did to Gannon on January 27, 2020. At the conclusion of the evidence that we'll be presenting in this case, you'll be asked to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the charges that we've leveled against her. You'll also be asked to determine whether she was sane or insane at the time that she killed Gannon. All of her decisions, all of her deliberate actions betray her claims of insanity. She knew that what she had done to Gannon was wrong. Why hide it? You'll hear her own voice through recorded phone calls and interviews. The evidence itself will prove her sanity. As jurors, part of your job will be to determine how much credibility, if any, you give to the witnesses. That same rule applies to expert witnesses. You'll get to hear from doctors. You'll get to hear from GPS expert witnesses. Lawyers get tongue-tied sometimes. And when they take the stand and take an oath, you get to judge whether what they are saying makes sense. Is it credible or not? And if it's not credible, you get to discard it. If it's credible, you can use it in your deliberations, but you all get to decide whether that credibility extends to that witness or not. The same will hold true for our expert witnesses and the defense expert witnesses. Get to hear from a doctor that will testify that the defendant was insane at the time of the murder of Gannon Stout on January 27, 2020. With all expert witnesses, you should gauge what they're saying, measure it against the other evidence that you're hearing. Does it make sense or not? Like all expert witnesses, if it doesn't make sense, you can discard it. You'll also hear from others who knew her best. People that have the best opportunity to see how she was acting. Did she understand the difference between right and wrong? Could she form intent? People like Al Stauch, the man who was married to her. People like her brother, Dakota Lowry, who flew out here after Gannon went missing. And most importantly, her very own daughter, Harley Hunt. See, Harley Hunt was in the best position to know the defendant's state of mind, especially as it relates to when this crime occurred. He was the only other older person in the house. When Al left to Oklahoma, Harley Hunt was working. She's young, 17 years old at the time, thinking about going into the Air Force. But she becomes the defendant's closest confidant after the defendant killed Gannon Stout. In fact, she also rode with the defendant on that van ride from Colorado Springs to Florida. She'll be able to tell you in her own words whether the defendant understood the difference between right and wrong, whether she could act intentionally or deliberately or not. And she'll tell you that she could on both counts. Remember, this case is about two people. Gannon had no choice what happened to him that day on January 27th. The other, this defendant, she held every single decision in her hands. She took deliberate, thoughtful actions that ended a precious life and tore a family apart. Your job as jurors will be to listen intently to all of the evidence. Because even the most mundane evidence, it might seem inconsequential when you're listening, is being given to you purposely so that you can make the determinations you need to make as jurors. Did she understand the difference between right and wrong? Was she able to form a culpable mental state? Every single piece of evidence that comes from this chair will be used by you to make that determination. The next time I get to talk with you directly the way I'm doing right now, that'll mean we've concluded evidence and we're giving closing arguments. At that time, both sides will get to ask you to make determinations based on what you all have heard. We're going to ask you to hold us to our burden of proof. The criminal justice system doesn't work if you don't hold us to our burden of proof. Our burden of proof is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The things we have to prove are the elements of the crimes charged. We also have to disprove that the defendant is insane, meaning essentially we have to prove that she was sane. The evidence will do that for you. We will ask you to give justice to Gannon Stout. We will ask you to find this defendant guilty for what she did to him more than 3 years ago. We'll ask you to find her guilty of murder in the first degree. Murder in the first degree of a child under 12 years of age. Tampering with a deceased human body for taking Gannon's body from that scene and transporting it across the country. And tampering with physical evidence. We'll ask you to convict her on each and every one of those charges. And the evidence will guide you towards those convictions. On January 27, 2020, 6:55 p.m., the defendant herself called 911. She called 911 to report that Gannon was missing and not come home. Call taker, you'll hear, ask the defendant, who was the last person to see Gannon?
Who was the last person to see him? I guess me?
I want to reintroduce myself. My name is Will Cook. I, along with Mr. Cellini, represent Letecia Stauch. Now, this is a very tough case. We looked at the jury questionnaires, prosecution. There was a lot of strong feelings questionnaires? Have you formed an opinion about Ms. Stauch? Got a lot of she's guilty. Got a few she's evil. People forming opinions about this case before they ever hear one shred of evidence. As a defense attorney in this case is very worrisome when people have come in and they have preconceived notions of what's going on. With respect to the question on the paperwork that you got about insanity, what do you think about insanity? Is it valid? Something that's legitimate. A lot of people said insanity is just a way to get out of taking responsibility. It's an excuse. It doesn't exist. It's fake. Got a lot of that. So I, as the defense attorney, have two big problems in the case. I represent Ms. Stout, who, according to a lot of jury questionnaires, is evil and guilty. And us raising insanity is a bunch of BS. A lot to deal with. Been looking at this case for going on 3 years now. All the photos, I've seen all the reports Mr. Tellini has. It's a lot. What you saw on the board this afternoon, that's the PG stuff, the rated G information, photos you're going to see. For a general audience, go forward in this case, you're going to see the autopsy photos. You're going to see the photos of when Gannon was brought out of the suitcase. And they're horrible. Horrible. It was an awful, awful thing that was done to Gannon. And I see Mr. Allen get up here and he's emotional, almost into tears talking about it. And I get it. I get it. What happened to that little 11-year-old boy is beyond description. The facts of this case, awful. You know, it's so bad. This is a lost cause. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't quit. I can't leave this courtroom. Got to do my job in this case. Mr. Tellini does. I can't just, after that opening statement, all the information that I've seen, the photos, the smiling picture of Gannon, hearing about him being shot and stabbed multiple times. Hundreds of witnesses and 800 pieces of evidence that are going to come in. I can't check out now and just sit down and write this out. I can't do it because it wouldn't be fair. Wouldn't be fair to the court system, the process, and it wouldn't be fair to Ms. Stauch. And I know people will say, well, who gives a shit about what's fair for Miss Stauch? The court systems do. The law does. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The war fought over these things that we're dealing with today. Old school laws, the presumption of innocence, right to remain silent, stuff that comes all the way back from old Boston and Paul Revere riding through the streets on his horse going, the British are coming, the British are coming. Old stuff, and it matters. And once we decide something in the media, before you have heard one shred of evidence, prejudge this case before anything has taken place, then all of that is lost. And we are truly a country that is no longer ruled by law, but by the media. I get it. We've lost. Mr. Tellini, we lost. Stout, we lost. We have lost in the court of public opinion and the media. He's guilty. I get that. This is a court of law. As Judge Werner said, come through those double doors there. This is a special place. This isn't the media. This isn't Facebook. Wash all of that away. Don't try to get up and walk out of the courtroom before you started. Do your jobs. Listen to the evidence. When the evidence is complete, go back into the jury room and weigh the evidence. All I'm asking of you, just give us a fair shake. I can see it in your eyes, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of you, as far as you're concerned, I could burn in hell for representing Miss Stauch. A lot of you won't even make eye contact with me. I might as well just be the devil himself up here running his mouth. But I'm not. No different than those three at that table right there. Paid advocates. Werner here in Voir says they are paid advocates. Leanie and I were paid advocates. They have their side of the story. And I just want to be heard. Want our side to be heard. And if at the end, guilty, but you weighed the evidence, you listened, you didn't prejudge the case, your biases, your sympathies, your prejudices that you had at the beginning of this trial, if you didn't let those come in, were fair and impartial, but it's still guilty, I'll take that. I'll take that in a case like this. A lot of evidence. Very, very difficult case. Don't quit on me. Now, Mr. Allen is right. He's a good attorney. He's well-spoken. He elected DA. This is going to come down to insanity. Maybe here. And was killed back in January 20. How do you figure that out? How do you look into the mind of a sick person and divine what they are thinking? Well, evidence, people statements, observations, recorded statements, phone call, heard Ms. Stout talking on. That's good stuff. What else can you look at? Motive? Somebody's motive. Remember that word? Up every day during jury selection for the past 2 weeks by the prosecution. Motive. You were told, and rightly so, by the prosecution that there is no requirement for the prosecution to prove motive. They're right. Does that mean that motive doesn't matter? No, it doesn't. Not mean that. Even though jury instruction talking about insanity, the prosecution just put up on the board, talked about, well, motive or lack of motive could be a sign that there is insanity or not insanity. And it's in the jury instruction there. So it does matter. It's not required, but it matters. And it matters because it's evidence. You don't have a motive, that goes to show a lack of evidence. Say there's a couple people involved in a shooting and a murder out in the community. Paper reports it as a random, senseless act of violence. One person shot to death. Police investigate. They have 3 people that are suspects that were there at the scene at the time of the shooting. One problem for the investigators. Don't really have any other evidence. A week later, doing some good police work, they uncovered that one of the 3 people was a drug dealer who was ripped off the week before the shooting by the dead man. A lot of money and drugs were stolen. All of a sudden, with that information, this random, senseless act of violence becomes a murder with a motive. It does matter. Could you?
You need to put it up. It's not hooked up yet. You can turn off the perimeter lights if you want. I'm not getting the feed come through. You are hooked up to the defense. Still not coming through. Oh, there you go.
enlarge that? Or?
That's what you're looking for, right?
That's the photo. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will turn your attention to the two boards, screens. This fancy pointer that you were alluding to, Judge. Extendable. All right, we've got a photo here. We've got some familiar looking faces. Gannon, Letecia Stauch. Stepmom, stepson. Gannon's little sister in the back. Look at that. Looks like everybody's doing pretty good. Happy, sunny day. Maybe Miss Stout is doing a selfie, holding the camera out. Whatever. When would have this photo been taken? The day before Gannon died. The day before he was killed. It wasn't a photo of evil, anger. A photo of someone, by all accounts, who was a loving stepmother. Care of Gannon. Gannon's father was on a deployment. Stauch worked as a teacher herself in the Widefield School District, an elementary school teacher. Got a person that was, living, it seemed like the American dream in a nice suburban house in Morrison Ranch, the suburbs of Colorado Springs, Colorado. But behind those photos and Miles, Stout. Oh,
Yeah, I did.
okay. Stout was hiding. Stout was dealing trauma and abuse that had been going on since she was a toddler. A troubled childhood. Mother wasn't really much of a mother. She had a line of stepdads or boyfriends or whatever. Her mother, come in and out, come in and out, in and out, in and out of her life. From the time she was 3 or 4 years old, Miss Stauch, until she finally moved out. And she suffered. She suffered horrifically from these stepfathers, these boyfriends of her mother. Watched her mother get beat by the boyfriends, physically abused, until eventually the physical abuse, these men reserved for her mother, eventually trained on the Stout kid. Little girl. First, it was just physical beatings, whoopings. emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and then it became sexual, where she was molested regularly. Five or six on until she was a teenager. Constant. She used to have to sleep in the car out in the driveway to get away, not have to molested and sexually assaulted by these men. Sleep in the car in the driveway of her house. Because her mom wasn't around a lot, kind of an absentee mom. A lot of these stepfathers, if you could call them that, cared for Miss Stauch exclusively. Mom was out somewhere doing something, gone for several weeks at a time. And Miss Stauch, as a young child and a young woman and a teenager, was left in the care of these men. How do you deal with this? You're 6, you're 7 years old. What do you do? Physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. How does a kid handle that? Well, a lot of people that have had bad childhoods go on and they're fine. There's some that don't. Some is a survival mechanism. Some of these children's personalities fragment. And why do they do this? This fragmentation of the personalities when there's abuse at a young age. Because in the case of Ms. Stout, her abuser was also the person that provided her means for survival. A 4, 5, 6-year-old kid does not go out and get a job and work and acquire their own food, pay the electric bill, pay the rent. So while they're being abused, they also, as a matter of survival, have to both hate and love, to fear and placate their abuser / caretaker. How does a person do that? Well, I think in a lot of situations, no one person can do that. That's where the fragmentation personality comes in. All the good and all the bad, all the evil and the hate can't reside in one place. And I know some of you, based on your jury questionnaires, think I'm telling some fanciful tale about this. I get it. I read the questionnaires. But as such, you have sworn an oath multiple times to follow the law and the evidence. Don't like insanity or dissociative identity disorder, that's okay. Joke or an excuse or not valid, that's okay. It's okay if you think that outside those doors. In here, you got to believe it's a legitimate mental health defense, that in fact it exists and that it is scientifically backed. You're going to hear doctors, sworn experts on both sides. So yeah, it's in the DSM-4 or 5, which is the book of psychological ailments and issues psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose things. Is it listed? Accepted in the scientific community issue, a real issue, dissociative identity of multiple personalities. Now, whether you believe or their experts believe what our expert believes about whether it was present in this Stout's case, different issue. But you must, to be fair, impartial, and unbiased, you must believe that it is a possible defense. It is a valid defense. It is a valid defect or disease of the mind that triggers the insanity provisions under the Colorado laws. Laws that trigger when we bring in some testimony or some evidence that there is insanity causes the rules, the laws to pivot. So that the prosecution has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt let's say. In this case, circle back around. Why all of that just matters. Going back to motive. Let's wait. Evidence, exhibits, photos, videos. We're going to be in here for 8 weeks. School's going to be out. Making plans for our Labor Day barbecues. Not Labor Day. Barbecues by the time we get done. But you know what you're probably not going to hear? During all that time with all those exhibits, all that evidence. All those witnesses. You're not going to hear about a motive. You're not going to be given a motive about why Ms. Stout. January 2020. Reason is there is no motive. There is no reason. Doesn't make sense. It's insane. Smiling photo. Next day, Gannon's gone. No reason for it. Prosecution may say, oh, well, makes it that more tragic that it was such a pointless death of Gannon. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that. But there was some major psychotic crack that went on during this time. Go from teacher, loving stepmother to 2 children, loving mother to her own child, Harley, a person that Gannon's father entrusted his own 2 kids, watched and loved and by this woman here. Being a killer of a 11-year-old boy. How do you get there? Big jump. There is no explanation for it. I don't have one. She broke on that day, ladies and gentlemen. She broke. Broke from all that was right. Made sense. And the axe, putting Gannon's body in a suitcase and traveling 1,300 miles, whole of Florida, and throwing the suitcase, gathering phase now. You're gathering the facts. Like Judge Warner's Miss Denver omelets. This is the ingredient gathering stage. Okay? It's in the cooking stage. When you go back to the jury room after all the evidence is in, you start putting the ingredients together. For omelet, or just a ham and cheese omelet. Whether you've got a guilty, not guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity, based on the evidence, the ingredients. When you're in the jury room, that's when you start putting it together. Just writing down, taking notes, taking it all in. That's why the judge mentioned several times to you today, I don't want y'all talking about the case amongst yourselves. Kind of a special, hidden, quiet place, this courtroom, especially you jurors. Don't want y'all talking about the case because that leads to deliberating and judgment. It's in the judgment phase. So, thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for coming back. We'll be spending a lot of time together over the next couple months, so keep an open mind. Put a lot of the bad stuff out of your mind for now. What the prosecution has to say, hear what the defense has to say. At the end of this, as Mr. Allen said, when he's concluded his opening statement, he said, I'm going to come back in a couple months and ask you to find her guilty. I or Mr. Tellini in 2 months are going to ask you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. Now the trial starts. Had opening statements, you've had all that now. He said and I said, it's not evidence. Projected up on the board and the videos and the audios that he played. That's not evidence. Remember what the judge said. If you had to deliver a verdict right now, it's not guilty. Woman right here is not guilty. He's presumed innocent. Not telling you to like it. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. I'm going to stop now because I'm running out of steam. But I really, really, really do appreciate your time. I know the judge pays due. Said earlier, you know, you're the ones that are making the sacrifice. You're the ones that, you know, are losing money because you're not able to go to work. That, you know, your workspaces, your offices are idle because you're going to be here for 2 months. What we do, this is where we work, all of us, the attorneys, we pay. They're the ones that make the sacrifice in this case. And I do appreciate it. And on behalf of my attorney, Mr. Tellini, I know he appreciates it.